the initial role that I went into, I had a couple of different client groups. So I was supporting our legal and our technology client groups. And because I am kind of a passionate technology adjacent person, it just was a really good natural fit. So I just kind of went deeper and deeper into technology as my client group and made a bunch of friends and figured out how to, phone a friend whenever I got stuck on something. And that's how I learned to code. I think the greatest challenge that we had, or that I had to work through personally, was we had a technology organization that had 5,000 people and 1,700 different job titles. So we functionally knew nothing about what anyone did. We just had a whole bunch of garble, and we had to kind of make sense of it. So what we ended up doing is it was a broader project than kind of just myself, but it was really myself, the VP of HR for technology at the time, and a small kind of core group of consultants. And we ended up building a career framework. So we built the technology career framework in terms of what that looks like. We had business involvement right from the get-go. So the CIO was our kind of sponsor, which I think was super helpful. And then because of the CIO was our sponsor, we were able to identify kind of those core groups of call them job family owners, so that they really had skin in the game in terms of defining, what is an engineer, what is a technical analyst, what is a project manager, what is a agile coach. And so we had conversations with each of these people to basically build out the specs around what that job looked like and the differentiators across level. And we basically built a giant matrix that says, these are the different jobs, these are the different levels, and the intersection of the two is kind of what gives you the job description of what that looks like. And then based on that, what we got to was about 40 different job roles in terms of what that looks like from the 1,700. And so based on the 40 different job roles, what we were then able to do is, because we'd simplified it to an extent where you could understand it in the data, we remapped every single person across the organization. So because I was the technology analytics partner, I built a model that was about 95% accurate in terms of predicting what job somebody would go into. And then using that kind of prediction model, there was 3 of us that flew around the world and basically said, we think your people fit into this job, tell us why we're wrong. And for the most part, they didn't tell us we were wrong. So that worked out really, really well. And what we were able to do then is, once we had everybody kind of in these core boxes, we were then able to see what is the actual work that's being done by each of these different groups, and then structure that in terms of where should that work be done properly. And so this is kind of how the talent intelligence piece flows into it, because what I ended up doing was actually working with our strategy and finance groups so that they would say, we think we should put this work here because that's the most economical and makes the most sense. I was actually able to push back from a talent perspective to say, we'll use platform engineering as an example. So platform engineering is very constricted. So the teams themselves don't necessarily need to work with a lot of external stakeholders. They typically work with services teams and kind of within themselves. And so the nice thing about that is we were able to take some of our other engineering functions, which leverage the platform, and put them onshore so they could work with our customer facing teams. But from a platform perspective, because it was so contained, we were able to put that in a lower cost kind of environment in terms of what that looks like. But what we saw in the talent intelligence data is, even though you could support the engineering talent in that kind of lower cost environment, that market wasn't developed enough to support the architecture or the actual system design work around that. So we actually had to take the architecture and move it to a different location where it was in the same time zone, but in a slightly different market where we could actually find the architects. So we were able to kind of apply that talent intelligence lens because we understood the work and what needed to happen where, and we could have a really wholesome conversation across kind of strategy, finance, and HR to say, this is why we're going to be successful and this is what we're going to move where. I think one of the ones is probably the most recent. So I actually just finished putting in a assessment solution. So we leverage Plum. And the beauty of the assessment solution is that it gets at something that I think is going to be kind of the future of talent acquisition. So if you think about talent acquisition in particular, and think about how you evaluate candidates. There's really three different things. There's, can the person do the job today, which is that skills evaluation of do they have the hard skills to perform the tasks that they're going to be asked. The second piece is how well are they positioned for the future and what drives and drains them as an individual? And can you align the things that are driving or engaging to them to the appropriate job role that they're going to be fulfilled? They're going to stay longer. They're going to be higher performing, kind of all of those types of things. And the third is, I think, the piece that is always going to be the domain of that recruiter, which is, have they developed coping mechanisms either on the skills side or the innate talent side to really fill any gaps that have kind of come up? So what the assessment solution did for me and why it was so fulfilling was it really addressed that second point of innate talents. And the cool thing about that is, even as things like ChatGPT come in, where it's going to be easier and easier to create that skills match. So if you think about traditional HR software, a lot of it is based on document compare. So you take the resume and you take the job spec and you compare the two and you get a percentage match, and that's how you sort your candidates. You start at the top and work your way down. I think those types of technologies with ChatGPT and some of the generative AI pieces that are coming out are going to get less useful, because what I'm going to be able to do is I'm going to be able to basically feed in my resume and feed in the job spec and say, create the best match between these two documents that I can. And so even as an average consumer, I can do that for free. And so what ends up happening is you're not differentiating on core skills anymore. You actually have to differentiate on something else. And that something else is that innate talents piece. Because I think one of the things that we saw throughout COVID was really around retention being a driving factor and making sure that people are really aligned to the right type of job for them personally in what drives and drains kind of their approach. And so the thing that was really fulfilling to me was, not only are you creating a better match from the company, so we can actually come back and say, if we decrease attrition by 1%, that's $1.6 million a year. Like, we can basically say that as a metric. But even on the individual side, if you're able to have that conversation and basically go to an individual and say, you're actually going to be happier and more fulfilled in this type of a job, like, that's something that HR hasn't quite gotten to yet. And I think through psychometrics, that's where we're headed.